Hello everyone, today I'm bringing a video focusing more on newer players because I have seen over the time a lot of topics on Reddit and on Kotu.org in which new players ask for tips on how to start out. And I think that since I've been playing this game for so long with the first one, I got some good insight on what I would suggest newer players to do, specifically on Company of Heroes 2. The topics I'm going to go over are more or less of a faction overview, what I think about them, or how I feel about the strengths and weaknesses of each faction. The faction to pick to start out with. Also, what to do when you are starting out in the game. And finally, more of a mindset thing on how to improve when going over to the multiplayer. So if you are more of a medium level player or advanced, I would suggest you to skip over to that part. You probably already know most of what I'm going to say here on the first parts of the video. Anyways, starting out with faction overview. So there are 5 factions in Company of Heroes 2. So the first faction that I'm going to talk about is my main faction, you could say, which is USF. What I feel like USF's strengths are at is in good at snowballing the game. So USF is a faction that if they get an advantage, they can quickly close that out in a win, especially if you know what you're doing. Now, USF, that's a really big strength, I would say. But for that, they have a lot of weaknesses. For one, they are bad at dealing with the combined arms approach. So if your opponent is set up defensively, trying to break that with something like artillery or something is not something you'll be able to do because USF doesn't have the best toolkit. They don't have all the tools like some other factions have. They have to break that defensive formation kinda by outplaying them and outmaneuvering them with good infantry play or good play in general. And the other weakness that they have is that if you somehow misplay, they, I would say, are probably the worst faction at coming back into the game. They don't have, again, the best tools to come back into a match effectively. So you're going to be really struggling in coming back if you screw up. Which is why I wouldn't recommend this faction to any newer players, even if their early game is easier than some other factions. Now, the second faction is OKW. OKW is, I feel like, the USF of the Axis side. So they are an aggressive faction, and their main strength, I would say, is that they have a good or easy early game, and they can easily outnumber the opponents. Their weakness is something more or less akin to USF, where they don't have the best tools in the faction, or they don't have all the tools needed. So again, breaking some kind of unit compositions that the enemy may have might prove difficult the later the game goes, and in order to break them, you'll have to, again, outmaneuver or do some risky play eventually to break the enemy front line. The third faction is UKF, or Brits. For me, Brits, the main strength is that their mainline infantry is a very good unit. And also they don't need to pay for healing like other factions do. So they usually don't bleed as much manpower, which is the main game resources, as some other factions do. They also have basically a decent toolkit, so they are an intermediate between OKW or USF and the other 2 factions which I haven't spoken about. They don't really struggle in dealing with anything really. So they have decent tools. The problem with UKF, and I think that many times you won't find this unless you find an opponent who knows more or less how to exploit the faction, which is they are sometimes susceptible to cheese kind of gameplay, where, for example, the enemy will bring out a sniper, and because of how the faction is designed, you have to play a certain way around the sniper if you want to win. And if you don't know how to play against that, you might really struggle. And that's, I think, the only weakness I find of this faction, or clear weakness, is that some strategies will really make this faction struggle. As for the other two, they are the original factions, and I think they are somewhat the best factions as well. We have Ostier, which is the main strength I would give about this faction is that they're versatile. They aren't missing any tools in their toolkit. If you need to counter anything, you'll have the tool somewhere in one of the tiers. And their other strength is also that they scale really well. So the later the game goes, the better the faction becomes. Their weakness is more or less linked to their strength, in that their early game is not the best. If you want to have a good early game, then either you play defensively or more defensively, or you are a good player and you can play more offensively, but still it's more risky. So the early game is not the best. And for the last faction, it's the Soviets. The Soviets, again, are kind of similar to the last faction, Ostier, in that they are a very versatile faction as well. They have every tool available to them to deal with anything as well. And basically they don't have any weak game phases, so they are very stable in that they have, a decent early game, they have a decent mid game, and they have a decent late game, so they don't really falter at any point in the game. They really don't have a weakness, I think. Soviets is probably the only faction I would say they don't have a clear weakness. They are really as strong as you make them be. If I have to point out any weaknesses, is that maybe they don't have any super cheesy, super strong strat that you can sometimes employ with the other factions. This is to say that they don't have their own cheese strategies. They do, just that they maybe don't have those roller units that some other factions have. But really, that's not really a big point. So this faction really, I think, doesn't have a weakness, which, in my opinion, is what makes it maybe the best faction in the game, and also the best faction to start out with. Now, again, going into the next topic, I would suggest you to start out with Soviets. Just like suggested before, they don't really have a big weakness, and they have a lot of strengths going for them. And because they are a really versatile faction, they're also going to teach new players how to use a combined arms approach, which is something really important in Company of Heroes. You don't really want to, just spam a unit. You want to learn how to use every tool available to counter something. And as Soviets, if you need to counter a tank, you have the anti-tank guns on tier 2. If you need to counter blobbing, you have the machine guns. If you need to destroy some kind of early emplacement, you also have the mortar readily available. They're mainline infantry in terms of being the conscripts. They are really versatile as well. They have snares. They really don't bleed you a lot, which is important for new players. Their healing is also quite good. And again, their mid game, they have the T-70 and some other nice vehicles to help you out. And late game, again, they are no joke as well. They are really strong. So as a newer player, Soviets are the must faction, I would say. Now, there are really some important topics that Company of Heroes has, in the sense that there's two main things that newer players should know, and that is that there is cover and the main points of the game. So cover is something that you should really use all the time. Cover is what wins or loses engagement, really. and cover is what's going to dictate also, because of that, how much manpower, which I'm going to go over, you lose over time. And manpower is the main resource of the game. And coming to that, also, actually, before I go into that, so cover has three types of cover. You have red cover, and you have medium cover, and you have green cover. And really, if you, at most you want to be at medium cover, you never want to be on red cover, and you also want to try as much to maximize the time you are in green cover. A green cover is the strongest cover. Your units take less damage when they are in that cover, and only a handful of units can really do more damage against green cover or really counter it. So that's that. The other important thing about Company of Heroes are the 3 main points plus the victory points. So victory points are one way to win the game, and they are what you see being the winning condition in 99% of your games. They are these points that are usually, again, on the center of the map, or really around the center of the map. Depends on the maps, really. And as soon as you have more VPs than your opponent, you're going to start bleeding them out of points, and as soon as they reach 0, they lose. However, this shouldn't be the main focus, and I think that I did a lot of mistakes in the sense that when I started playing, I felt like they were the best points. Obviously, they make your opponents lose, so they must be good, right? The problem is that you can't really hold VP points if your opponent is not caring about them and capping actually important points like fuel and manpower and munitions, and then using that to have a stronger army. And with a stronger army, then they're going to hold the VPs themselves really easily, and then you are really in a bad position. So VPs are something important, yes, but they should really be your second focus. Your main focus should be on really the other points. And there are three types of points. The first one is the manpower points, which, again, manpower points are the circles in the minimap. And in Company of Heroes 2, they offer munition and fuel. And also, the resource itself, manpower, is the most important resource. Manpower is basically what dictates in a game how aggressive you can be, really, and what new units you can bring out. And I think there's a really big mistake in people not giving it the most important factor in the game, really, because it is. Manpower is the driving factor behind everything in the game. So with manpower obviously brings out many types of units, and it's used to reinforce. So it's really something you must preserve. And the next type of resource is fuel. Fuel is what you use usually to bring out vehicles, and vehicles are some of the strongest units. So again, fuel is really important as well, because vehicles are the only types of units that usually you are trading HP or hit points in the vehicle for manpower. And that's basically because repairing is free. You are basically trading nothing for your opponent losing manpower. So that's really important. Munitions, on the other hand, are also really important, also depending on the strategies you're going to employ. So munitions are used to do upgrades on your infantry or your tanks, basically on your units. And they are used for abilities, either grenades, again, on your units, or really big abilities that come in the form of commanders. So also really useful. As you can see, every resource is really useful. Again, manpower, I would say, is the most important of all of them. Okay, so now you have a basic overview of the factions and the resources, and basically the win condition and the faction that you should start out with. So how to proceed? So I would say that the most important thing is that you should start playing against AIs. And I would say that at maximum you want to play against a normal AI, because after that the AI starts really cheating in resources in a big way, and it usually doesn't really have a human-like behavior, so it can create very bad habits starting out. So, but why is it important to play against CPUs? Well, it's not really to learn the game at a hard level. It's really for you to get to know the units of the faction you're going to play, and maybe some of the other units the other faction has. So I could have basically an overview of every unit of the faction now going through the video, but really, because obviously if you're starting out you don't know the game, it would be useless, because the factions have many units, and at the end of the video you'd have already forgotten about most of them, if not all of them. And I find that practice is really the best teacher here, and if you want to learn all the units, it's going to be through play. So play against CPUs, try to use at least each unit once. And when you feel like you have basically a good grasp of every unit of the main faction, I'm not talking about commanders here really, then I think you're ready for multiplayer. Okay, now, multiplayer and the mindset to have to improve, and this really applies to basically medium level players really, and it applies to a lot of players. I have been through many years when I played Company of Heroes 1, a medium level player, and I struggled to get into the top positions in the leaderboard. But I feel like at some point I did what I needed to do to become a much better player, and I'm okay with sharing it, what I think are the main fundamentals that you should have to eventually become a really great player. So first of all, there's this big problem where people are afraid to play 1v1 because you don't have again a partner trying to help you out if something goes badly, and that can be scary, but it's also a really big strength, in the sense that if you're not going to be relying on a teammate, then you're going to become a stronger player on your own. And eventually, if you want to play 2v2s, you're going to be a much better player than the other counterparts, I can assure you that. Okay, so the mindset that I have, and this has brought me into many top places in ladders in different games, even League of Legends, which is you really shouldn't play to win the game. You really should play to improve yourself. Each game, you think about what you did wrong and what went wrong, and you shouldn't really mind about losing games. So if I'm rank 11 or rank 9, I shouldn't care about dropping out to rank 8 or even 7, because ranks really are a bonus. If you eventually become a better player, the ranks are going to come along basically really easily. So again, for newer players, I would recommend to always stick to one faction first, and also one strategy of that faction, one build order. Basically, have that build order down to the wire, have the counters ready to go out. So if you find something that you struggle with, you need to find a counter out for that and try to know what to do in that situation for the future. So basically what I'm saying is have a build order really, and down to the wire, in terms of if your opponent does something, you already know how to counter it. And that's really important. Eventually you'll get to the point where you'll start knowing how to adapt on the fly, and you won't be going basically following a guidebook at some point. That's where you want to reach. But starting out, you really want to know how to counter everything with a specific build order. Okay, so having said that, you're going to hit many brick walls playing, in that you find something that you can't counter. And really, the best way to go over this is to start playing the faction you're struggling against. And that's what I did in my time, and it really helped a lot. So, if I'm playing USF, and I did that in Company of Heroes 1, and I'm struggling on how to counter MG play, I just start playing as Oster, and I do what my opponent is doing and see how my opponents counter it. And maybe in the first few games, I'm going to have really easy wins, and I'm going to be thinking to myself, oh, so really, all this time I have been playing the wrong faction, and it's really easy to play what the opponent was playing all along. And then eventually you get to a rank or a point where people start knowing how to counter that, and then you learn from them when you start getting countered. And then you go back to your faction, and you employ what you just learned, and you get better that way. And that's really what helped me out to become a medium level player in Company of Heroes 1. And in Company of Heroes 2, I really didn't need that because I was already a good player at the game, but I still do that sometimes because it's needed. And also that gives you a good overview of over time of all the factions if you keep swapping. Now, I would say that you always need a main faction, and it's better to have a main factions, such as Soviets. But again, it really improves your gameplay if you swap around factions from time to time in order to learn how to counter them with your main faction in the future. The other important thing is that really, if you want to become a better player and learn, it's really about quality and not quantity in terms of games. So, yeah, the thing that helped me also become better is if I lost a game, I analyze the replay. And really, the analyzing the replay is something that probably not many people do, and they should do if they want to really go to the top leaderboards. Because analyzing replay gives you a lot of things, and I mean a lot. Usually, in a 1v1 scenario, because you don't have a teammate, you're going to have less vision on the map, so you're going to have a lot of fog of war on. And fog of war is usually a fear factor. I remember being afraid of fog of war because you don't know what's obviously there. And in analyzing replays, you can take fog of war off and see it from your opponent's perspective. And you can really start to demystify some of the things that you thought about in the game, like, oh, I thought maybe I had units there, or he was ready to attack me here. And then you watch the replay, and none of that was true. And it also gives you an overview of how the resource situation of your opponent was. So let's say you were playing the game and you thought you did really well harassing the fuel, and then you watch the replay and you actually had a lot of fuel. So maybe you didn't do that great of a job, or you misjudged how many resources you had, and that's important to know later on, so you can adjust your build orders. So analyzing the replays, again, 2 main points. You're going to know more or less movements in the fog of war of your opponent. So you watch the replay, you see where the units go. You see that really shouldn't be afraid of the fog of war. It's not like your opponent has 200 units hiding in the fog of war. He has probably the same amount of units that you have somewhere. And as soon as you can keep track of where they are, it's going to be really easy. And replays help a lot of that with that. And the second point again is analyze his resources and his tech, and see just how many resources your opponent had while you were playing the game. Maybe you even made your opponent struggle a lot on the manpower sector, and as you pushed your advantage in that part of the game, you wouldn't even have manpower to reinforce his units. So that's the main points for newer players. Again, if you are an average player, a medium level player, start analyzing the replays. And also, don't be afraid of losing ranked games, really. Forget about your rank, it's not like it's even there, okay? And just really try to play for yourself to be a better player, and the ranks will come along with that. So yeah, I think those are the main points that I want to talk about today. I hope this is useful to someone somewhere, and I'll see everyone next time.